Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Automotive Logistics and Supply Chain Live, or welcome indeed to the show. If you're just joining us in this session, we're going to be drilling down even deeper into the challenges and opportunities in scaling up battery and electric vehicle supply chains. I'm Christopher Ludwig, Editor-in-Chief here at Ultima Media and Automotive Logistics. My pleasure to welcome you back, and indeed our fabulous panel. In case you missed it or didn't get a chance to see, we just had a session on battery supply chain before us with one of our panelists here, Daniel Harrison. And during this session, we're going to have a nice Q&A session with a number of our wonderful guests, which you can see here: Magnus Ödling from Volvo Cars, Daniel Harrison, who are automotive analysts, John Carmichael from Maersk, and Bruno Constans from Gefco. So we're going to have plenty of time for Q&A. We're going to kick off with a presentation from Bruno, but let me just kind of set the scene again to say this sector is one of the real growing aspects, even in the context of COVID, as we would have just heard from Daniel. We're seeing continuous investment in battery supply chain. There's something like 160 plus gigafactories in the pipeline over the next decade. That's according to Benchmark Minerals, a consultancy. And that's bringing lots of different challenges, but importantly, lots of opportunities. And I want to kick us off with a presentation from Bruno Constans, who's heading up innovation at Gefco. Bruno's going to set the scene for us in terms of what happens across the battery supply chain and look at what it can mean for logistics providers. So Bruno, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. So we will start the presentation right now. The focus will be on battery, but we can only understand battery if we have a larger scope with electric vehicle supply chain solutions. And this is the reason of this presentation, to set the floor. So as a first slide, as you can see, we may have thought that COVID-19 crisis would have reduced the appetite of the market for electric vehicles. And it's not the case. It's not the case. And as you can see, as the automotive market is declining in 2020, then very slightly growing in the years after, the market share taken by electric vehicle is growing very sharply and more sharply than before. As you can see here, we expect to have 26% of the entire light vehicle market share constituted of electric vehicle in 2026. And just for an information, I was reading yesterday that the market in France in July was already hitting a market share of 17% electric vehicle. So COVID has really been a catalyst in the EV innovation, and it hasn't refrained the growth of EV. If we move to next slide. There are several challenges then with regards to electric vehicle. The first one, because it's not obvious, is the regulation pressure. And this regulation pressure is getting more and more factual and actual. We have more and more governments or local governments who are setting up new rules to enter the city centers, for instance, but more widely with regards to the industry, we have more and more tax with regards to CO2 emission. We have more and more regulation around the electric vehicle themselves. So this pressure is growing and is a real challenge from an EV OEM perspective. Another either challenge or opportunity is the new mobilities that we witness in the cities and all over the world. We all know that city mobilities have changed a great deal, and the way we use our vehicles as well has changed. So we're in a context where electric vehicle is in the middle of many big changes that are around different mobilities, ownership of a car versus usage of a car, for instance, and everything we can witness every day. Last, it obviously means pressure with regards to production, as to produce an electric vehicle. Many things are different than a thermic regular vehicle. So if we move to the next slide now, what do those changes implicate from a supply chain perspective. From a supply chain perspective, it means more complexity to manage, that is for sure, and cost and green efficiency as well, that must be bear in mind, because we are doing all this under economic constraints, and we must provide the right supply chain with a competitive offering. So the first challenge for us is the cohabitation of two models, because thermic vehicle, although they are not growing, and as you've seen the forecast, they will still remain dominant on the different markets for the years to come. So we will have two kinds of manufacturing models, one that will remain thermic and other ones that will be EVs, sometimes on the same plants, sometimes on different plants. And depending on the market, the growth of EV versus thermic will be different. If you take the example, for instance, of Africa, where the grid or the electric consumption and power supply is different than in Europe or in America, it obviously makes sense to consider those two models for a long period of time. The second challenge for us is with regards to batteries, and we are heading to the core of the debate here. Batteries obviously need to be transported, need to be charged, need to be also recycled at the end of their life, and all this is quite new from an automotive supply chain standpoint. And last, we can talk about the new habits of consumption, omni-channel, digital, less people purchasing cars, more people willing to use cars, which has an impact from a supply chain challenge, which is after, obviously, the sale of the car and during the life of the car and at the end of the life of the car. So if we move to the next slide. This is the reason why when we have started to think about those topics a few years ago at Gefco, we decided that we would take it from an electric vehicle perspective, overall supply chain, and not only from a battery perspective, although the battery is the core of all the changes that are happening, and although it is obviously strategic to know how to handle batteries in the supply chain in the future. So if we move to the next slide. This is to show you how important and on the flow every step you can meet a battery, or you can see a battery handling, and this is changing obviously the way we handle logistics. So from left to right, from inbound to outbound, you see that if we start from component suppliers, then you need to ship the batteries to battery manufacturers. You can also ship cells and modules, because batteries are made of cells and modules. Then you can assemble the battery, then you can move to auto plant. Then you need obviously to produce the car, and the car ends on a compound or a workshop. It needs to be charged, it needs to be stored in a different manner, and then it can finally move to the final customer, the end user, who is not mainly, or who will not mainly be a private person, but fleet and rental company, mobility providers, car dealers, and so on. So this is the first 50% of logistics, but we need to bear in mind the second 50% of logistics, which is the aftermarket, which is the end of life of the batteries, the recycling, and everything that needs to close the loop. So it means that we need to think as well of the damaged batteries considered as dangerous good to be sent back to recycling centers, and then to close the loop and move again to the battery path cycle. So this is quite complex, and this shows how the battery is the main element in the center of the EV supply chain offering. If we need to the next slide. So the way we perceive supply chain is not only a battery, but it's inbound and a bunch of services for inbound logistics. Here you can see, if we focus on the battery, what is necessary. We need to be obviously compliant with dangerous good transportation. We need to be compliant with value-added services. We need to provide line side deliveries as we used to, but with different kind of goods, battery being a chemical good. From an outbound perspective, the storage, the fleet preparation and the maintenance have been impacted by electric vehicle and batteries as well. So it has been completely reshuffled. From an aftermarket perspective, it's exactly the same because we need then to deal with waste management. We need to deal with doorstep pickup and delivery. And from a logistics standpoint, obviously, it means different ways of doing things. Although we've been doing those things in other areas of our business, for instance, the ADR certified business for chemicals, from an automotive perspective, now it's kind of new, and we've had to adapt to this. And last, battery end-of-life management is obviously something very important, and that will grow in importance in the future, as we know that we'll have hundreds of thousands and millions of cars that will be on the road with electric power and with batteries that at some point in time will either need to be recycled or to be sent back for repair to the manufacturers. If you combine all this with our engineer and transport optimization in a world that is setting up in terms of factory, because so far we do not have yet all the battery factories that are set up all over the world. We know that most of them today are in Asia and mainly in China, but that will most probably change, at least from a European perspective, in the future. You were mentioning, Chris, 160 gigafactory projects, and this is all what it's about. So engineering and transportation optimization will be key in the future. Customs and tax optimization as well, depending on where those factories will sit and where the markets will be. And obviously full traceability and control tower, which is more classical from a logistics standpoint. So all this shows the impact of the change of a battery in a car and in the context of electric vehicle. If we move to the next slide, I have taken here one very sharp example with regards to outbound, and this is a compound, and the way a compound is going to work and is working today at Gefco with regards to what it used to be like a few years ago. So first of all, the compounds must obviously comply with the regulations in terms of electric products, in terms of battery. It's different in terms of fire protection. We need to be equipped differently. The storage must, as much as possible, be green, because we, as I was mentioning, have the CO2 emission and the green topic that is growing in importance from a logistics standpoint. It must be connected, 4G, 5G, because batteries and vehicles need to exchange with the compound and give some information that relate to the state of the battery, the charging of the battery, and so on. And the most important, probably, the people must be trained, and it doesn't happen from a day to another. They need to be trained to new technologies. They need to be authorized to intervene on the vehicles, and they need to know, obviously, what they're doing and take care of their health. So in terms of facts and figures, it means that we need to have a high range of working time, operational, whatever the outside condition, can be icy, snowy, high temperature, rainy, still the operation must go on. Chargers must be of all compliance with all kind of make, all kind of cars, all kind of technology. And this is what we have achieved so far at Gefco with most of our compounds. So it's been a heavy investment, both technically and with regards to people training. So if we move to the next slide, and as a conclusion, what I would say is the electric supply chain raise more concern, and this is the debate around the agility of the supply chain. It must be cost and CO2 efficient. And the most important point, probably the last one, we must always make sure we are fully compliant with what the regulations that are still evolving are asking us to be. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bruno. I think that really outlines the transformative aspect of electric vehicle supply chain. Not just the complexities around regulation and shipping, which we know and are a big issue, but indeed the whole battery lifecycle management, a whole array of new services and requirements that go through. So I think thanks very much for sort of setting the scene there. And I think with that, I'd like to bring the rest of our panel onto the stage so that we can go into some of the details around some of that. And I'd like to start with Magnus as the manufacturer on the panel. We heard this morning from Martin Corner about some of the opportunities and challenges around electrification. And Magnus, I know you've been certainly, I'm sure, hard at work on an upcoming or very imminent launch of an electric vehicle here in Europe. So, and the XC40 Recharge. Can you give us a sense from an inbound logistics and engineering point of view, what you've been needing to do to launch this product out of Ghent?
Good morning, Chris, and thank you for having Volvo and myself on this important subject for us. You're right, we are in launch mode for the XC40 Recharge in our Ghent plant in Belgium. And maybe I should start to say or ask a question, does it count to launch a car during a pandemic as a challenge? I believe it does. In many aspects, right? Global supply chains during the last 6 months has been more challenging than before, but also traveling between Sweden and Belgium is not plug and play these days, meaning having people supporting the launch verifications on site is a challenge of another type, you can say. Basically, though, our flows within Europe and internationally now are mostly uninterrupted by the pandemic, and we're able to support the launch with supply through our responsibility of inbound logistics. A big thing, of course, which Bruno mentioned in his introduction here is the introduction of the battery as the source of power for electric vehicles. And in our case in Volvo, we're adding a big additional sub-assembly in-house, and that is adding new challenges, new flows, new volumes, new part numbers, and a new global supply chain into our business. And that has been the main focus for the last year for our engineering team to be ready to support go live basically as we speak. In Ghent, the first cars are rolling off the line.
Great, Magnus, that gives us an excellent sense of that. And just as a quick follow-on to that, as you mentioned, adding that sub-assembly, and Bruno raised this as well, the complexity of producing these two powertrain types in the same plant, perhaps even in the same line in some cases. Is introducing that complexity into that plant, an issue for the supply chain as well?
First, maybe adding one more challenge of launch. We're very happy to see the orders coming in for the XC40, but of course, our ability to respond to the market quickly is important, and hence one challenge in this transition to a electric future is at what speed will it go and what capacities are we installing, and that has then a carryover into your question on the complexity that we bring into Ghent. In fact, most of the audience is hopefully familiar with our top seller XC40 within the C segment, and in fact, at this point in time, we run 3 derivatives of the XC40 on the same line in Tremor Final, meaning the traditional combustion engine propulsion. We have the plug-in hybrid, as well as now the battery electric XC40 running down the same line. And of course, that is adding a lot of parts, a lot of suppliers, added complexity, added fluctuation, the importance of having a proper planning and good forecasting, as I referenced the capacity question before.
Excellent. So let me take a few of those points actually to our panel. Bruno, in terms of what Magnus was just outlining there in that complexity from Gefco's side, how are you as a service provider managing that level of complexity for your customers? Is it through better IT and connectivity and forecasting down the supply chain, for example?
Yeah, it's a very good question. And as an introduction, I would say that we also learn with our OEM customers. So very modestly, at some point in time, the regulation are evolving, and we walk the talk, but we also learn via walking and understand our markets as they evolve. If I take, for instance, the example of what we do for one of our customers, it starts with the battery supply from China to Europe in reefer containers, then offer storage facilities to sequencing solutions that comply with the rules, then support the client in terms of customs and tax solutions because they may not be inside the EU 27/28 so far countries. So it means that with regards to the volumes that are transported from a place to another, it has an impact also from a customs and tax perspective, plus added value on the products such as testing the batteries, small assembly operations, and all these, in fact, all together is in a way something we used to be very strong at in the thermic model, but from an EV perspective, it's even more true. I take an example even sharper. We have sometimes cross-dock operations that are 2 days away between the warehouse where we store the batteries for one of our customers and the plant of our customers. And we need obviously to provide sequenced deliveries that are 2 days away. So you can understand how complex this is to put trucks on the road when you forecast a production that will happen in 2 days from now, and where you have to sequence all that for your customer and be obviously right on time and deliver the service that we should deliver.
I want to turn to John Carmichael at Maersk. So maybe we can even step a bit further back into the supply chain here from your point of view and the shipping side, for example. Obviously, we know there's a lot of complexity in the regions and in managing the supply chain. So from your perspective, where are the opportunities to optimize the chain?
Thanks, Christopher, for having me. And there is a lot of complexity on it. It goes all the way from the raw materials that need traceability, and I know Volvo, for example, was working quite extensively on blockchain solutions for this. That then goes into electrochemical and the transportation of the batteries from themselves, for example, from China into Europe, where today we're involved. I think there is optimization, one in collaboration across the industry, because the volumes are relatively small today if we look at it from an overall sales perspective. But if we collaborate towards this, we can actually have a scalable solution, because I think scalability is probably one of the largest challenges, not only in the short term, but in the medium term. How do we get to a supply chain that can react to exponential growth in EV sales when the battery is sort of the core, becomes a core component? And the other thing is, how do we connect the new tier ones? Because some of the customers that are supplying these batteries have not been involved for a long time within the automotive industry. So how do we connect that into a seamless supply chain that makes it as efficient as possible? And this can be one through managing variance through dynamic flow control, making decisions that can actually make lead times as predictable but as reactive as possible when we have limitations on air freight. So I think there's several aspects to the supply chain that will still be explored as time goes by.
It's an interesting point, and if anyone was watching during Martin Corner's session this morning, he raised the prospect of potential shared platforms for manufacturers, in which would consolidate some of this supply and material. So is that the sort of thing you'd have in mind, in effect, that manufacturers would in effect share their logistics hubs and centers in serving the battery and EV plants?
I think that's a potential solution, especially as we ramp up. Instead of having multiple, that's also less sustainable, multiple facilities with the same specs, same regulations, you can actually, in a smart way, design a supply chain that actually caters to several levers in the responsiveness, the agility, while reducing the carbon impact of that supply chain, and at the same time being responsive enough to the OEM's needs in terms of sequencing and on-time delivery. So I think there's several angles on that one, yes.
Okay, fantastic. Magnus, obviously it's being alluded to here, but and you mentioned the sub-assembly in the plant. Can you give us a sense of how Volvo's battery strategy for the Ghent production is, kind of looks? Is the cells coming from Asia? Is there several stages? Just if you can just give us a brief outline, if you like, of how that will be managed.
Yeah. First of all, adding this sub-assembly of a new part into our plant, which is the heaviest and most expensive part we have ever built into a car, that deserves its focus and attention. And doing so, the supply is very important, and hence the connection to my area of responsibility in inbound. So it's public in the news that Volvo Cars last year made a global deal with LG and CATL for supply of battery modules in all 3 regions over the next number of years. And this is what we are planning around and to support. And then we are planning for our 2020 launches. We are building the sub-assembly of the battery in-house, and we're planning so to do in the future as well, taking out part of the complexity that Bruno mentioned in his case, how to sequence a very heavy part over longer distances, etc. So we go directly from manufacturing or a sub-assembly on a conveyor directly to point of fit in the C shop. So that is a decision taking at Volvo, and then we're looking to refine that and learn as we go. We already have learnings from our first launch of electric vehicle within the Volvo Car Group, with the Polestar 2 having started production early this year. Even more so in the middle of the pandemic, by the way. But the carryover, since it's built on the same platform and the same technology, we've had good learnings taking that into our Belgium factory.
Absolutely, and as you've raised a few times, I do think it's worthwhile indeed. These launching in the context of COVID is certainly no small feat. I'd like to bring Daniel Harrison into the conversation for a moment. For those of you who were just watching, Daniel, we just did have a session where you presented on some of the battery supply chain aspects and what's happening across the supply chain. Do you think, when we just heard about Volvo's complex supply chain and how they're managing it from a sub-assembly point of view, is it inevitable from your point of view that more of this supply chain localizes and regionalizes in and around where EV production is happening, in this case particularly in Europe, for example? Oh, just a second, Daniel, we have you on mute. Let's get you up. There you go.
Yeah, hopefully you can hear me now. Yeah, that's absolutely true. There's definitely a trend towards localization of battery cell manufacture as volumes are ramped up. It's very much the case that prior to that, it didn't make economic sense to build plants at low volumes, but as volumes ramp up, that will increase. It's also been done very much in collaboration with joint ventures between OEMs and cell suppliers. But having said that, the localization, as far as we're aware, will end at that point. It won't extend to the manufacture of the cathodes, the anodes, or even the raw material mining of lithium, manganese, copper, etc. That will still be retained in the region. So it's only a localization of part of the supply chain.
Indeed, as you mentioned, the cathodes and that aspect would be much more difficult to localize. As a flash forward, I encourage some of you to check out a session we have upcoming with Christoph Stürmer from PwC, who will also highlight the importance of the processing of some of these parts as well, which actually can represent a large part of the value chain. So as you highlight, Daniel, there's a lot more to this than just the cell or just the battery itself. Something for the panel overall, and maybe then we'll move on from the battery because we know it's not the only aspect here. But the restrictions that come with shipping batteries and shipping cells, particularly perhaps related to air freight for dangerous goods, does this change, or how does this change the approach to inventory management with perhaps less opportunity to expedite or things like that. Maybe starting with you, Magnus, from Volvo's point of view, in managing those complexities, and then I'm happy to hear from John or Bruno on that.
First, maybe highlight that it's not only air freight that is challenging with this new technology, but also we should have respect for the new technology. Many of us have, of course, followed accidents connected to lithium-ion batteries, and we need to learn the difference, if any, between the accidents that are happening and the type of parts that we are moving in relation to, for example, battery assembly here. But the point I wanted to make was that also rail freight of dangerous goods in China, which is one of our home markets, is also challenging and unfortunately limiting our ability to do transportation in a sustainable way, which is also very important as we are both have legislative as well as purpose-driven reasons to transform into electric vehicles. We take a great interest in doing this in a sustainable way. And then we really need to understand what we can do and what we can overcome to do this in a safe and sustainable way. And of course, I don't want to fly anything. Then, of course, we need to support production who supports the market demand. But that goes back to why we are involved and pushing for making the right decisions to localization, for example, of all new parts connected to this in an environment where the capacity is still a little bit hard to predict.
Absolutely. John, what about from Maersk's point of view?
So from our point of view, of course, there will be inventory considerations to cater for lead time variations, but I think the rail solution becomes very relevant for Asia to Europe. We have explored, for example, using Russian rail instead of Chinese rail in a ship-rail combination that actually provides better lead time, of course, not as fast as air freight, but it provides a saving in lead time while reducing a lot of the complexity in terms of regulations around transporting batteries over land, because it's one country, basically. So I think there's several solutions. One of our focuses is how do we allow them greatest flexibility latest in time, if you will. So how can we actually make that decision that it needs to be diverted to a faster transport mode the latest possible in the process? Is it even inside the port? Is it at a transshipment location that we can actually shift to a new transport mode that will allow the avoidance of air freight, which of course is quite costly. So I think there's several considerations and several innovations that we can focus on.
Great. Anything to that, Bruno? I mean, that rail link is something that's been important for Gefco as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And rail is remaining something very important. And as you know, we transport already some batteries from China to Europe via rail. And the regulations and legislation in China is evolving as well. So we expect it to move further in order for us to be able to sequence better the transport between China and Europe. That's one part of the question. The other part of the question is what happens in Europe so far and the setup of new factories or new joint ventures on different territories in Europe that by definition are going to make the battery factories much closer to the electric vehicle plants, and that will obviously change the equation as well. So it's from a logistics standpoint, we also obviously follow the decisions of the car makers and of the different governments and what is happening from a pure production standpoint. And as I was mentioning, it's evolving still, and we are far from seeing a kind of very stable scene as what we've seen for the classical car industry in the past 10 to 15 years.
Fantastic. So I want to turn to one of our audience questions here, and this question has gotten quite a bit of upvoting, highlighting the importance from the point of view of the audience. And this is about packaging. So the use and sharing of standardized packaging is key to sustainable battery supply chains. Do you agree? And how do we make this really happen? Perhaps I can turn to you first on that one, Magnus.
It is indeed a hot topic, and how we treat it as Volvo now is that this is we don't have a heritage in this area. It's virgin ground, and we have one opportunity to do it right from the beginning. So hence we spend extra time and energy and resources on understanding what we need and which modern solutions we can put in. Which business model we should go for, whether that is rental or own or lease, that can also have heritage reasons and can be different between regions. But definitely that subject is on our radar.
Fantastic, great. Let's talk. Let's. I'm not saying that it's not about the battery, all about the battery. We know that it's important, but there's other aspects to building EVs which are different, which certainly Magnus has alluded to as well. But I thought, is there more opportunity, well, especially when we look at some of the new EV modular design platforms, for example, do we see more opportunity to re-engineer the supply chain and logistics design as more EVs get launched? So again, sorry to keep turning to you here, Magnus, but maybe you can kick us off there, given the pretty ambitious plan over the next 5 years or so at Volvo. So do you see quite a shift, if you like, from your current supply chain design, even beyond the impacts of the battery?
Yes, and I would start by saying that, and what I was alluding to before, we have an opportunity to do this right from the beginning, and we can feel that this is also coming through in other parts of the company. For example, reducing complexity. So to be able to be responsive to the market, to be able to be cost competitive, because it's also a challenge for the industry, as you know, the transition over to EVs, to make sure we secure profitable transition. So that goes for us in logistics, and the expectation on myself and my team to continuously deliver cost efficiencies. That goes also for our colleagues in R&D and procurement. So, and that will have a indirect positive effect on the development of the supply chain. Less complexity in number of parts, maybe less suppliers, will allow us to develop a more efficient network. So that link is something we talk a lot about, and we spend quite some thinking now how we can really be on top of this very early, actually, as we kick off the development of the third generation of electric cars.
Excellent. Well, then let me turn to John and Bruno to start on response there, because obviously if Magnus and the logistics team is getting more involved with the R&D team early on, it also raises the question of when logistics companies can get involved in that early stage planning to look ahead for your networks and stuff. So John, and then maybe Bruno, is that something you're starting to do now with customers? Do you see more opportunity to do that as we move from low volume to high over the next couple of years?
I think the auto industry has been very good in involving their tier ones in the design process and actually being a part of the development of vehicles. And I'd like to see that also permeate into the logistics service providers, because there's several challenges where we actually cooperated in more solutions. I think, for example, the platform concept bring different ways of transporting vehicles internationally, where you could have, for example, centralized production of a platform and then final assembly closer to the market. Postponement, different types of manufacturing processes that could change the way the supply chain runs today. But of course, collaboration is key to make that actually the most cost efficient for everybody.
Absolutely, I think it's key, and this is the fact that we gain trust of our customers a long time makes us today very close to our EMs and understand what are the plans, and also as we move forward, what are the volumes and how they evolve, because this is part of the challenge that we have, is to supply with the right volumes, obviously, in a demand that is changing very much and very quickly. So that is one of the important points that we see, and the collaboration with our customers is absolutely key. Yes.
Daniel, perhaps from a slightly different perspective, the industry is seeing some new alliances and collaborations form, as we move forward, whether General Motors and Honda in North America, Ford and Volkswagen, Volvo within its own, let's say, group of companies, Geely and etc. How do you see those partnerships changing the way that the industry kind of works in terms of the production side, or perhaps even the sharing of parts and components? Have you in your research looked a bit to what these alliances might mean over for them in the longer term?
Sure. So they're very much about cost saving on the platform side. To develop those platforms is horrendously expensive. So they're looking for alliances to share those development costs, and it's not only between OEMs. It's often between tier one suppliers and OEMs to develop the entire powertrain, everything including the motor, the controllers, the thermal control, the battery itself, etc. So I see it as very much an inevitability that there'll be more and more of this platform sharing, because the electric vehicle platform, if you think about it, is the average consumer is not concerned about, who produces the motor or the battery, whereas in previous generations where they had ICE vehicles, a BMW engine defined that was a BMW. That's not the case anymore with electric vehicles. Consumers are not aware, they're just aware of the overall performance. So there's very much a case for common platform sharing of all of those resources to maximize the performance and cost efficiency of those powertrain components.
Maybe starting with you again, Bruno. When we look at some of those new partnerships forming in the industry, do you, as a logistics provider, see an opportunity to serve that in a different way, whether it's new customers or more consolidated services, for example? These sorts of new partnerships, do they demand new logistics partnerships as well?
Yes, well, number one, as it was already mentioned by Magnus, we have tier one suppliers who are different from AV perspective. So we obviously have to partner with them, and we, for some of them, didn't know them before. The interesting thing is the battery and EV technology is not only applying to vehicles or to automotive, but also to other industries. If I'm thinking of the agriculture industry, for instance, when you see that more and more harvest machines or tractors are taking the same technology platform. If I take obviously the two-wheelers as well, and you can think about all the new mobility examples you have all around yourself, it shows how important the logistics of battery is for so many different markets and industrial companies. So this is the reason why all the know-how we have in the automotive industry as a pioneer in a way for these new technology and new supply chain for batteries is going to help the other industries that I just mentioned, and help us as well from a supply chain perspective, provide the right service to those industries. So it's going beyond automotive industry only.
It's a great point, and maybe John, I'll turn to you on that. I know you head up automotive for Maersk, but clearly the biggest container shipping line in the world, moving lots of industries. So is there a kind of cross-industry approach from the way you're looking at the battery, the wider electrification, if you like, and how you offer those services?
There definitely is. I think there's three or four angles to it. One is, of course, the chemical side and the input into the battery production. But more interestingly, there's the power solutions, so to speak. So power grid applications and other applications for batteries that are beyond the automotive industry. There's also the fast-moving consumer goods side, and we see e-cigarettes and all sorts of different personal items also having batteries. And I think, for example, we are collaborating with companies, particularly on the return logistics side, because it's a problem that will not only be in the automotive industry, it's what to do with those damaged or end-of-life batteries. It's also for other categories that use these batteries, and probably collaborating and cross-pollination of management of that supply chain will be key. So there's several aspects to this.
Great. Yeah. Apologies about the phone ringing. It was Elon Musk. He was saying he agrees completely, but I put the phone right down because actually we don't need to hear more from him. We hear enough from him as well. No, great points there, I think. And actually it's interesting because, I mean, Daniel, when you in the presentation before, you were highlighting, of course, that the growth there isn't purely EV, and the need for a lot of this capacity going into the mega factories, gigafactories, indeed is across other industries as well as the growing side of the batteries as well, isn't it?
That's correct. Although automotive it dominates demand, yes, there's consumer electronics. There's also energy storage, which is interesting from the sort of end of life viewpoint, because we know that a lot of OEMs are involved in passing on old EV batteries to, when they get below sort of 70-75% capacity, passing on that to energy storage applications where the weighing performance is not as critical as in an EV. So that's actually, the OEM can essentially sell on that battery, because often they're leased as part of the vehicle. So they actually make money from that aspect, and that's an increasingly important aspect as first generation EVs now come out of use.
Fantastic. So, Magnus, you alluded to it earlier, actually, when you mentioned obviously the first model on that platform was a Polestar 2 in Lushao in China, and as I said before, of course, Volvo through sister companies, etc., is kind of, if you like, part of a group that is electrifying in many areas. Does that also change, the way that you're looking and designing your logistics, and you're partnering more across those companies? Again, is that potentially offering more opportunities in the network, in the wider network?
Not yet so much, but maybe I can, very brief history lesson is that it was just last month, 10 years ago, since Geely surprisingly took over Volvo Cars, buying it out from Ford. And you can split it into 5-year periods. The first 5 years, Volvo spent developing the cars you see on the road today, the successful XC90 and the XC60 series. In the second 5 years, it was the development and the launch of the 40 series on the so-called CMA platform, which is now shared with Polestar as a new brand and Lynk & Co as a new brand, co-owned with Geely within the Geely group. And now we go into the next 5-year horizon, and I realize now I talk about 5-year plans and a Chinese company. That was not my intention, but I think we will see the next level of collaboration in the group, and the group has continued to grow. For example, adding Lotus as one brand that could be interesting to join in on the technology and the scale synergies.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, I think that always good to have a little potted history there, and interesting to see what the next 5 years bring, even if it's not from a centralized sort of planning perspective, but lots of innovation there. Let me turn to another. We've got about 10 minutes left here, and we had another audience question, which I'll put to the panel for anyone who wants to address it. Given the additional complexity of EV supply chains, what technology investments and shifts in supply chain strategy would you recommend? Obviously, it's a broad sweep there, but nonetheless, if there's anything that comes to mind, maybe from your side, Bruno, obviously you were outlining much of that complexity right through to the end of life. So is there a particular, from a logistics point of view, technology, IT, processes, etc., that perhaps would help Gefco in the next stage of this to service customers?
Yeah, I would take two different angles to answer. The first one is with regards to evolution, because we, as you were mentioning, in terms of process, our processes need to evolve, and that's what is happening with the new technologies that is brought in by the batteries in the EV supply chain, and that's what we do on a kind of constant basis at Gefco, obviously to comply with the regulations and the certification of the ADR and everything that relates to chemical products. So that's one part of the answer, and it's short moves every day finally makes a difference after a few years or a few decades, obviously. On the other side, if we're more disruptive, It's true that the weight of IT and the way we manage and we handle our IT tools to provide information or services that we were not that used to provide to our customers is certainly one important topic that we are working on. So it can be very simple. It can be track and trace, for instance, but it can be also some additional elements that relate to 5G. Is there a battery leakage in one of our containers? Or is there a battery that is warming up? Is there any kind of security problems or concerns that we should be aware of during the supply chain? This is something that is definitely changing the scope of supply chain and the way we see logistics.
Fantastic. Would you add anything to that, John?
I think the role of technology is only growing, and the pandemic was a clear example of that in some ways. I think also for us, one of the key challenges is transparency and visibility. For example, we are pioneering a blockchain solution to try and achieve this, that not only gives you transparency and solution, but also smart contracts, smart documents that can maybe facilitate all the challenges we see in customs and in different intercontinental transportation challenges. So I think that's one of the key changes I see in the future is technology being the driver and driving exception management, or managing the supply chain by exception instead of being just an afterthought in the supply chain.
Daniel, if we were to look ahead a little bit further even, or even perhaps not further, is there other technology besides lithium ion which perhaps will play a bigger role than we're all looking at? Obviously the train, we're on a pretty fast moving road now towards electrification, and lithium ion seems to be the technology we're going around. But actually, is there anything else on the horizon or in the development that could change things as well?
Yeah, I mean, in the medium term, there's refinements of lithium batteries, enhancements. So we're talking about lithium sulfur technology is a particularly promising area, but the whole lithium battery area is likely to dominate for many years to come. It's certainly what the industry has backed heavily, despite claims that fuel cell technology with hydrogen is ultimately the ideal solution. The problem with it is it's extremely expensive. I think there's only a few examples on the market from Honda and Toyota, and it's the infrastructure is a real headache to introduce. If we're going to roll out infrastructure for EV charging and then 5 years on having to replace that or supplement that also with hydrogen infrastructure, I don't think that's realistic. I see fuel cells being a niche technology that's primarily used in commercial good vehicles such as heavy goods vehicles, buses, and specialist applications where they can install hydrogen infrastructure. But if you're talking about everyday consumer passenger vehicles, I see EVs being powered largely by lithium batteries, possibly capacitors as well as a niche thing as well.
Okay, thanks. So we're moving closer to the end here, and let's look at some reflections. So, Magnus, we have a global audience watching, both today and over the course of the on-demand side, of supply chain logistics experts. We've talked about the plans that Volvo has. What are some of the key areas that you would say to the logistics service providers where Volvo will want the most help and support to kind of achieve these goals, so that the industry can better serve you, if I would say, put it that way?
If I start with specifically on the subject that we're all here on today, I've already mentioned regulation, meaning making sure we understand and have the right regulation. I'm not saying loosening regulation, but understanding it and making sure we have solutions that are efficient, being compliant and safe. Secondly, of course, we all do this for a reason, the greater good of preserving the planet and avoiding the forecasts that we have ahead of us. So how do we do this in a sustainable way and making sure that we do the right thing from the beginning? So when we add new technology and we add new flows, really trying to do it right. And then to the market who's listening in the industry is, how are you changing to join us on this journey, providing sustainable solutions that are efficient? And for a combination of long-term sustainability and but also being competitive in the short to mid-term. That's very important for us, and that's where we more and more try to reach out to the market. This is one way, but we also need to learn and explore from the market and the current and future suppliers that we are working with.
Fantastic. And John, if you were to be, speaking to customers and shippers from OEMs, tier suppliers, what would you say they should be doing most now to partner and work with companies like Maersk and Bruno from Gefco, again to get to make the most out of this upcoming transformation or ongoing transformation?
From our perspective, collaboration is key into the future of the batteries. And so how do we not only, of course, the automotive industry, but other industries into making this most efficient supply chain? I think it would be silly to have a super sustainable vehicles being put out with a very inefficient and sustainable supply chain behind it. And I think that's one of our key focuses, is how can we aggregate and work together to make a supply chain that's as efficient as it can be. That might also mean we need to share a bit, we need to collaborate a bit more on some of the solutions that we need to put together. So I think that's one of the challenges also for the industry in the future.
Great. Anything, Bruno?
Well, I would say exactly what John just mentioned with regards to partnership, and it's not by chance that we have chosen as a tagline Partners Unlimited, because we believe that we need to understand very closely and strictly the needs of our customers and go in depth with them in this new path, because we don't know everything, obviously. We are certainly here to provide help and service and knowledge from a supply chain perspective, but our customers are also helping us very much from an automotive industry perspective. And this is, I think, the way, and it's exciting to evolve in this direction, because it's a tremendous progress or a tremendous change in the automotive industry that we've never faced before in the past 50 or 60 years, probably, with this new powertrain. And this is very exciting from our side to meet and understand and listen to our customers and provide the best possible solution in a partnership manner.
I think that's an excellent point to end our panel discussion on. So first, I want to thank Bruno, Daniel, John, and Magnus for the time and insight. I hope the audience, you found it as insightful as I did, and that you take some opportunities as well in the virtual networking to connect further and follow up on other questions with our panelists and indeed the colleagues who are there. So thanks again to the panel, very much appreciated. And for our audience, just again a little flash ahead. I mean, we're almost in the midst right now of what I'd call an EV conference within the conference. So obviously we've heard from Daniel on the supply chains. We've had this panel. We have an upcoming session on alternative powertrain analysis from PwC. So please check that out. That's at noon GMT, 1 p.m. Central European, and just in time for hopefully some of our North American audience to start waking up and join us as well. Throughout the event, we have a lot more on this topic too. We're talking finished vehicle, logistics for EV, including with Lucid, and a host of other sessions digging deeper into this, alongside other content which we at Automotive Logistics continue to bring you and produce. So keep up with that there. We're very keen to follow this journey and transformation with you. For those of you who are keen to watch our China analysis session, we have now been able to upload into our program, and you'll be able to watch that at 12:45 UK time and 1:45 Central European time. So check out that one too, if when you get a chance, and it'll be on demand. And again, all of this content, it's great content, will be available on demand. Most of our sessions from today by the end of today, and certainly by tomorrow. When you go onto Brella, you click on past content, and it will appear, and it will be available for some time to come. So as I like to put it, you can binge watch all of this content, as I'm sure you will want to on the weekend and things like that. So thanks again to our panelists. Stay with us, keep with us. Christopher Ludwig signing off for now, and we'll see you again real soon. Thanks again.
Thank you.